So we've got some more steel in now, a load of lengths of box. This is going to be to make up the platform that sits in between the two dynos. So the idea is the front dyno will be fixed, and then the back one's going to slide forward and back to give you an adjustable wheelbase. And then obviously you've got to have a floor in between that the car can drive on, obviously, and that obviously needs to be able to get longer and shorter. So I'm going to make like a scissor action situation with that box section. So first step is going to cut this to length. Right, you can see I've cut away lengths of box up now. So this is sort of what I'm thinking. Obviously it's just lying on the floor at the moment. Will be supported. I'm going to put some angle along the front edges of each dyno. And it'll bolt up there. And then the stationary side, which is the front. So up to here, we'll have a support across the middle, which will then hold that side up and also support this side. And then this side will slide in and out on top of that supporting rail. So this side obviously be bolted to that dyno. Spent quite a bit of time debating the lengths of these because it's fairly critical. The length of these steels basically determines, or directly determines, the minimum and maximum wheelbase. So I spent quite a while figuring that out, but I've come to the conclusion that it's better to have a slightly longer wheelbase possible. So obviously two-wheel drives, you haven't got a drop inside both beds, so this decision is largely only affects four-wheel drive vehicles, and it's unlikely to be getting anything on that minimum wheelbase that's four-wheel drive. Better to have a bit more long wheelbase capacity than short, I figured, in a four-wheel drive department. So hopefully we can get some decent long wheelbase trucks and stuff on here as it is now. That's the plan anyway. All right, we're kind of at the stage now where I actually need to get the two dyno beds in their final position so that I can bolt the front one down. So while this one's at the front and easy to get to, I need to get the rollers mounted on the front and the back of it. So that's basically what that bed will then roll on when it's at the back. It's going to roll on I'm going to make a frame with some flat steel on the floor. So I spent quite a while deliberating what I was going to do, but in the end I've come up with the idea of just using some pallet truck front wheels, which are like a nice wide roller, nylon roller, with some fairly heavy duty wheel bearings in them, obviously, because they're designed to take a lot of weight. I'm actually going to put 3 on the front and 3 on the back, which is probably overkill. So the first thing is to make some plates up, which I'll then weld to the front and the back of the dyno, which will then carry the rollers. And I'm going to weld these on now before I sheet it in, and then I can sort of design the sheet work around that rather than having to cut the sheet after it's welded on to add these bits in, and then they'll be welded straight to the frame on those 3. You can see this main chassis leg there, and on the end. So I'll pick up those points with the rollers. All right, so like I said before, we're going to use some of these pallet truck wheels, which are kind of ideal, I reckon. Nice and heavy duty anyway. They got 20mm ID on the bearings inside, so I'm just going to use some 20mm bolts through some plates that we've cut out here. So we'll bolt that up against the dyno and then have 2 side supports to pick up that bolt. And the idea is I've measured it here so that the roller is just about a centimetre lower than the rest of the dyno. That way we can keep everything as low as possible. So got the mag drill out here now. I've just made one as a template, and then I'm just drilling through that one each time to make sure they're all the same. So I've just loosely bolted all these together now. I'm not going to weld these plates to the base plates yet. What I'm actually going to do is set the dyno down on the floor, tack the base plates along each side of the dyno, actually resting on the floor. That way I know all the base plates are exactly level with the floor, just in case there's any discrepancies in the frame. And then what we can do is lift the dyno off the floor. So then we can just go ahead and weld all these on at a set distance so that they're all the same. Hopefully should just be able to weld them top to bottom exactly the same. And then with the way that I've offset the hole should give us our ground clearance, which isn't a lot, but it's all that's needed. Like I said, the lower we can keep the whole thing, the better, the easier it is for getting cars on and off. So I've had the dyno on the floor now. I know this concrete is pretty level here, so I've used that as a reference. So I've just put each plate where I want it to be, tack them on. Now I'm going to lift the dyno back up again and weld on the wheel plates. and then everything should be sitting level and happy. So this is what I'm thinking for the rollers. I just got it propped in here with a jack at the moment. So that's just going to bolt up flat against that plate, which I know is true with the dyno, and I know the bottom of the plate is true with the floor. So as long as I line all of these up in the center, that will then give me that 2 centimeters of lift from the bottom of the dyno, because the roller sticks out the bottom. I'm just going to go around now and just tack all of these assemblies in position for a minute before I make anything too secure. Just make sure that looks good and drops down. Probably have to put some fairly substantial tacks on before I actually drop it down, because this thing is really heavy. But that's basically what I'm thinking. Okay, forgot to get the camera out for a bit and I kind of got carried away with the welder, but got all of those welded on now. So they're all in their final positions. So in theory now, when I let that down, they should all touch the floor and it should roll forward and back nice and square on them. So next job is to have a bit of a move around here, because I need this dyno to move out the way. That one needs to come in the back, and then that one needs to be in the front. So I'm gonna have to have a bit of a jiggle around here to make that happen. Right, so before I start boxing this all in with tin and plate and all the rest of it, making it harder to access, obviously all the plates and stuff on the top come off, but while it's really easy to get in here, I need to sort out the airlift on this second dyno. Those of you that have been watching for years might remember on the first one, there's basically an airlift between the two rollers that lifts up and just aids you getting the car out. So you've only got to just come over the top of the roller rather than actually trying to climb up the side of it. Now, when we did the original one, which was several years ago now, the actual airbags were okay. So I reused them, just redid the ends, sort of sorted all that out, and it was all good, and still is. However, this one, the airbags are really, really knackered, perished. So what it actually basically is actually just 2 lengths of fire hose, sandwiched with pieces of steel sandwiched between them, which are obviously then flat, and then because they lay flat, sheet of steel between them, another fire hose, and then the lift on top of it. Now, I've actually struggled to get hold of the fire hose in the right size. The original was slightly wider. You can see that's part of the original there. It's completely knackered. It's obviously dried out and folded up and cracked, so there's absolutely no chance it's going to work. This piece is still in a length, but as you can see, has seen much better days. So I've got some new fire hose, which is a little bit narrower. So the idea is to cut 2 lengths of fire hose, then the ends get folded over and crimped with those bolts to stop that end from leaking. And then we have a bung in this end with an adapter just to some 8mm push fit nylon or plastic pipe. I'll have to remake those end bungs because obviously they're meant for the slightly bigger pipe. I'll either turn down the old ones or I'll probably actually just make some new ones out of a piece of bar stock, just in case I do ever have any problems and we can somehow find some more hose like this. We can always change it, but I'm fairly confident it'll be fine with the smaller hose. I cut 2 lengths of that new hose now. So I've just folded it over on the end, and then it just kind of clamps with 2 bolts and 2 plates to seal the ends off. And then, like I said, there's a bung that goes in the other end, so we can just adapt it to an 8mm or 6mm, whatever we end up using. I think it's 8mm on the other one. Push fit connection, which will then go to a pair of solenoids. If you look on the old dyno. I'm just going to do it exactly the same. Oh, actually, I've got it all disconnected here in a minute, but I'm going to do it exactly the same as I did on the other one. It worked great. So one solenoid fills it with air, and the other one dumps it. And we just got a pressure regulator, because if you give it full shop air pressure, obviously that's probably going to be a little bit more than those airbags can handle. And then it just tees as it goes in. This one's a bit grimy now. So that's the 2 airbags in there now. So you can see there's a sheet of flat steel along the bottom, the first airbag, then there's a hinged sheet in the middle that hinges with the lift, and then the second airbag on top. So it obviously gives you the double the lift of just having the one. And then on top of this is the actual lift arm, which is the piece you can see in the center there. That comes back and hinges in the back of the dyno, so that just comes up and down in a fixed position, and the airbags just push on the bottom of it. So we kind of reached the point now where we need to put the 2 dynos in somewhat their final position. The front one I've got where I want it, so I've positioned it so we can put the ramp straight out and have easy access from the main door. The idea is I'm going to have the ramps fold up, so when you're not using it, it's not taking up excess room. So where that one's going to go is fairly fixed, because it obviously is based on where the door is. And I've measured back, obviously, the maximum wheelbase, and then enough behind the rear one to allow for a pretty much a worst case scenario, overhang situation and room to strap, etc. So now really I need to position this rear bed exactly square with the front one so that I can start mocking up a frame on the floor for this to roll on. So I've just roughly done it by measuring from the corners of the chassis, and it's within, a centimetre. But really the critical thing is that the actual rollers themselves are perfectly parallel from one to the other. So what I've devised is the old calibration arm, which basically just a piece of metal with another piece welded to it, happens to be perfect for going in, butting up against the front of the roller, and that's something I can replicate on both sides of both dynos. So what I'm going to do is hold that, touching the tops of both rollers, touching the front of the front one, and then I can put a straight edge across the back and mark the chassis. So I mark the chassis in that place, both sides on both, and I then know, as long as I measure the max wheelbase between those two marks, left and right, everything should then end up be parallel. I can then put some strips of metal on the floor, which the rollers are going to run on, and start building a framework for everything to sit on. The idea is I'm going to have 3 strips on the floor that this one rolls forward and back on. It'll be encapsulated with box. There will also then be a frame through the centre, of which the centre of the walking floor will be supported by. That'll be supported halfway. And there'll also then be the mechanism to drive this one forward and back. We'll use those side boxes to drive, but we'll see more of that in a later video. Right, I'm starting to make up the main frame here now. Got Reese here. So I've started at the front because this is the bit that's fixed, so this ain't going to go anywhere obviously. So I've cut 2 lengths of steel to form the main sort of sides of the frame that runs right around the outside of the dyno. I'm going to secure it to the front dyno with 2 plates and some bolts. Obviously the front dyno will be bolted to the floor. That's what the angle line across the front and the back of it's for. So then what I'll do is I'll probably just weld some tabs on the frame halfway, or maybe 2 places, and at the back where that will then be bolted to the floor, I'll have a cross member running across the back to tie it all together, and there'll also be one running across the middle which will have risers on it that will pick up the walking floor halfway. So the main thing is to get it attached to the front one first, and then we'll work backwards from there. Okay, I've skipped ahead a little bit here now. I keep forgetting to film what I'm doing. So I think in the last clip we had the two rails up each side done. So you can see I've got the cross brace in now in the middle. So that there is exactly where the fixed part of the walking floor ends. So there'll be a riser off that support with another support going across to support the weight in the middle. And then both halves of the floor will be supported by that. And then obviously the dyno frame itself. So I brought that right back past this dyno, and then put a beam in the back to hold everything rigid. And so I've made this so it's almost a perfect fit for the dyno. There's about a couple mil clearance each side. That way when this one's going forward and back, there's no way it can shift sideways. It'll be kind of sandwiched between those 2 rails. It's obviously important that it comes forward and back in line. The next step is now I'm going to make the 3 rails that will sit underneath these 3 rollers and be between that support and the rear support. There'll be 3 of them, and probably some cross straps in the centre just to keep them all perfectly straight, because it's pretty hard to buy steel these days that's not bent. Right, I've got those 3 guides welded in there now, so everything's just attached at the moment. We've got about 2 mil of clearance on the edge. I've just dropped the dyno back down. Easy said than done. And see, it now rolls forward and back literally by hand, which is exactly what I want. Right, now I'm happy with the way it's rolling forward and back. Everything seems to be square. I'm going to weld up all of these pieces that I tacked in properly. Right, so that's the main part of the chassis, pretty much put together now, other than welding some tabs on the side so we can anchor it to the floor. That is pretty much done. Next step will be probably doing the walking floor in the middle and the support for that. So I'm probably going to put some angle on the front and back of the beds to support one end, and then like I said, there'll be a beam through the middle that supports the middle. Right, we've got a bit of an assortment of jacks and all sorts going on here. So I've just started to tack in the first side of the middle floor. What I've decided to do is lie all the steel, so obviously only half of these will end up on this side, the other half will be on this side. I've laid them all in so that I know the spacings are correct. Rather than measuring them all, I've just figured it would be easier to lay them all in there. I've got an assortment of jacks and props and things going on underneath to hold. I've just got a temporary bar in this side, just holding this end up level with the front. And then I've just got a couple of jacks that end holding it up against the piece of angle that I've got bolted to the front of the dyno. So that's bolted there, and it's going to be welded to this half of the bed. And then that side will be bolted onto the dyno and welded to that half. The two halves will still be manageable and removable. Obviously, if you weld it all up, it's going to be impossible to do anything with in the future. So I've just gone through there now and tacked, you can see, every other one. So now I can take off. I've just got a temporary steered across the back here as well, which I've just been using to keep them, well, to make sure that A, they're all true at this end, and also make sure that my gap is parallel with the back one, because it's easy when you work along a long distance like that of lots of different pieces of steel. You can easily lose a centimetre by the time you get to the end. So I'm going to remove every other there now and just leave what's needed. So I've gone through and taken out every other steel you can see there now. You can kind of see a bit better now the two temporary pieces I just had in underneath, just with a load of jacks supporting all that. So I'm going to cut a piece of steel to run down the centre to act as that centre support, and then probably one each end and one in the middle, just short spacer pieces to support that, and just tack weld that in one position. And then I can get the piece of angle mounted on the front of the rear bed, and then lay in all the steel the same, and probably close it up nearly closed, and then that way the beams will be sort of up to here, so I know they're going to be square. If you sort of start at the end and I'm slightly off, obviously as it tries to come in it'll pinch, so I'll probably tack it all together while it's virtually closed right up, and that should keep everything square, hopefully.